My name is Mike Ermintrout, and when I'm not busy with my security consulting job, I come home from a hard day of work. I like to unwind by setting myself a nice bubble bath and listening to my favorite podcast, Saulcast. Adam, Gil, be a couple of good boys and make tonight a really great episode. Take it away.
Welcome to Saulcast. On today's episode, we're talking about Better Call Saul Season 4, Episode 7, titled Something Stupid. We already recorded our instant take earlier in the week, so you're going to want to check that out to hear our raw, emotional reactions right after watching the episode. But today we have our full recap and analysis for you. We've had a chance to think about and digest the episode. I'm Gil.
I'm Adam.
Let's get into it.
You made it. Come on in.
This you, Saul Goodman?
This is unequal justice. You don't know the whole story.
Next thing you know, case dismissed.
You certainly don't think small.
I've kept you from your work long enough.
We check back in with Hector this episode, and there was about an 8-month time jump, which we'll talk about when we get into Jimmy and Kim's storyline this episode. But that passage of time has allowed Hector to recover somewhat. If you remember a few episodes back, Gus hired that top-of-the-line doctor to handle Hector's care, and he's now at a point where he can respond to questions with a finger tap. There's no bell yet, but he can answer yes or no questions by tapping on a table.
Not only can he tap on a table, but he can knock over simple objects.
He flicks his finger and knocks a cup off of a table, so another nurse that's walked into the room will bend over to pick it up, and he has an opportunity to check her out while she's bending over. And the doctor sort of writes this off, saying, it must be a muscle spasm. And you see Hector not exactly grinning, but sort of lip twitching in what appears to be his attempt at sort of smiling and enjoying the moment. A creepy grin, but I'll say not as creepy as what we saw from Gus last episode and what we're going to see from Gus later this episode. So I don't think not a whole lot to say about this scene. This is mainly set up for a subsequent scene. Do you have anything to say about it?
Well, he just seems very childlike in his demeanor, in the sense that he is learning the colors and answering these very simple questions. Then he knocks over the water so that he can look at this nurse's ass, and everything about him is very low level. And you realize it's pronounced now because of the stroke, but he was kind of always like this.
Plus, he's been here for months, so he's probably bored and just trying to find ways to amuse himself however he can. Later in the episode, we see Gus speaking to the doctor. In Gus's home, he's cooking what looks like a delicious meal.
His famous paella, which he also made for Walt.
Oh, okay, so the paella is a Gus classic. So torture small animals and cook a mean paella.
That, and also he would make a Chilean sea bass, which I remember one of the higher-ups in the DEA telling us in Breaking Bad.
If you ever see Chilean sea bass on a menu, order it. I've never been disappointed by Chilean sea bass. I've been disappointed by paella, but never Chilean sea bass. So while Gus is cooking his paella, the doctor is giving him the update that Hector has made significant progress. You can tell Gus, he basically says, you know what I'm going to ask you. He wants to know if Hector is there. Is he actually conscious and himself? She says it's really more of a philosophical question at this point, but then she shows him footage of what we saw earlier. Gus is watching the video and he sees Hector flick the cup off the table. And then he gets that creepy grin on his face. And I went back and verified. At that point, some score cuts in, some music. And it is precisely the same music that played last episode, right before Gus tells Hector about how he prolonged the Coates's life. And he gets the same grin on his face. So we can comfortably say that this is the evil Gus score that cuts in here. Because he takes Hector flicking the cup off the table as confirmation that Hector is there. He tells the doctor, "You've done a good job," and essentially, "Your job here is done. Thank you for your service."
I've kept you from your work long enough.
Oh,
It is time to delegate Mr. Salamanca's care. His recovery has been remarkable. And my gratitude to you is beyond words.
Are you sure? Hector's progress is very promising. With sustained, intensive care, he may eventually learn how to talk and even walk again.
Perhaps we should temper our expectations.
Right, and just as he kept the Coati with the broken leg, now he has Hector, who is also disabled, but capable of suffering.
The doctor actually tells Gus, "Oh, we don't have to stop now. If we keep this treatment going, he might be able to speak again. He might be able to walk again." Gus smiles and says, "Perhaps we should temper our expectations."
Yeah, and then he talks about how he donated an entire wing to her hospital for her clinic.
Basically another way of saying this deal is wrapped up. He says, "Thank you for your work." He confirms that what he did for her, how is the wing? She says it's great. So he's tying up all the loose ends and saying, "We're done here." So last episode gave us some insight into Gus's character, showed us a little bit more about how he can bask in this, in suffering in others. And this adds a layer to our understanding of Hector's injuries, which is that not only, well, they weren't actually caused by Gus. That's what's funny. They were caused by Nacho. Gus actually helped Hector recover. But the interesting point is that Hector could have fully recovered, and Gus prevented that from happening.
And did you notice that through their entire conversation, Gus was wielding a knife in a threatening manner?
I did not take notice of that, but as if I needed another reason to find him creepy. That's all we see of Gus and Hector in this episode. We also check back in with Mike and Werner. So this episode has a few good uses of interesting music. We have Something Stupid playing, the Frank Sinatra duet that we'll talk about later. And when we first check in with Mike and the Germans, they are being transported from their living quarters and taken to the super lab where they're working. And over this whole scene, we hear a song by Burl Ives called Big Rock Candy Mountain. It's sort of a melancholy, lackadaisical song is kind of how I'd describe it. And the German crew working under Werner, they all look very tired here. You can tell that they've made this drive from their living quarters to the laundromat many times. And the song that's playing over it is about hobos dreaming about paradise. So I think the message here is they're sick of being in this place and they want to go home. You also mentioned, Adam, in the instant take earlier this week that they kind of made the living quarters, they made where they were working seem sort of pleasant last episode, and now it all seems sort of darker and more downtrodden.
Right, you just don't get any sunlight. Who knows how long it's been since the sun has even just touched their skin.
They're very intentional about making sure that the crew doesn't get any exposure to the outside world. When they get picked up from their living quarters, the truck goes into the warehouse. They get in, and then they leave, and the next time they're released, they're inside another warehouse. So very literally, they're not seeing any sunlight.
Well, what if that wasn't actually a privacy measure and more of just Mike was You know how Mike knows everything? What if he was mistaken? It's just like, listen, these are Germans. They hate sunlight. Just give them shade the whole time. They'll like it that way.
Germans are sensitive to vitamin D. It's poison to them.
This is what, one of the times when Mike's know-it-all attitude steers them wrong.
Well, they're being tired and sick of the place ends up being a problem, because the next time we see them, they're working in the underground facility, and one of the guys in the crew, a bearded guy, backs a truck into a rebar, knocks it over into some equipment. Kai gets pissed off and yells at the guy, "I don't like living in this hole. I want to get out of here. You've created more work for us, basically, and you're going to prolong our time here." And then we hear Mike yell at them in German. So he's been studying his German, and he tells them all to calm down. Next time we see Mike, Werner, and the crew, the bearded guy that knocked over the rebar is slumped in a couch, empty beer cans around him, empty beer bottle.
Mm-hmm.
So you pointed out that you thought he was drunk when he made the error.
That added detail of him slumped in the chair and those beer cans there makes me think he might have been drunk.
Yeah, I didn't read it that way the first time I watched it, but on a second viewing, it cut right from the accident to that guy lying with empty beer cans around him. So I think it's a perfectly valid reading of the scene, that he wasn't just tired, but he might have been drinking on the job. What's interesting is that when Mike talks to Werner after this and essentially is asking, what's the damage? Werner's giving him the lowdown about we're going to have to fix the rebar, etc. Mike asks him, what if we send Kai home? Which I thought was interesting because Kai wasn't really at fault here. What's your read on that? Why is he asking about sending Kai home and not this bearded guy?
Yeah, that is interesting. I'm wondering if maybe Mike was more worried about the potential for them fighting with each other and things turning ugly than he is worried about the project getting delayed by accidents. And so, yes, it was bad enough that guy knocked over the rebar, but in Mike's mind, maybe it's even worse that these two were at each other's throats over it.
He sees the accident as a symptom of a deeper problem, that they're so sick of being there, morale is low, and maybe he thinks that Kai is sort of an instigator there. Getting rid of him maybe brings up morale.
Possibly.
Werner says, we can't do that. Kai is their best demolition man. He reassures Mike that Kai is a good boy. They're all good boys. And they both agree that they just need some R&R.
They thought they were going to be here for 8 months, and they can see we're not even halfway done.
You have done a wonderful job, Michael. You brought everything we could ask for. But you can't keep men locked away forever. They need fresh air, a change of scenery, and you understand?
R&R. Rest and relaxation.
Precisely. This is what they need. R&R.
And that's essentially where the episode ends in terms of Mike and Werner. To me, it still feels like more setup. That something is going to happen here. I know last week we were speculating on what's going to go wrong. We thought maybe somebody was going to talk. Maybe Kai was going to cause some sort of a problem. So far, the issue seems to be exactly what Mike was trying to avoid, which is that they're sick of living in a hole. They're sick of being there. Do you have any thoughts on where else this might be leading?
Well, so they're getting stir crazy, and it looks like the project is going to take at least twice as long as they originally planned. It's hard to say exactly where it's going to go. I think they're alluding to the workers themselves getting into conflict with one another, but I don't know. I don't think that will be the major plot point for this.
If I had to guess, I think I'll stick with my original prediction, which is that they're going to see at least one of the crew members as a risk of maybe exposing what's going on. Could be that it's almost a mutiny where they say, I'm going to, I want to go home. I'm done here. I will, maybe one of them will threaten to expose what's going on. And that could be just a result of them being so tired and maybe not having their right mind. Their judgment could be sort of poor. And Mike is going to have to maybe he'll be given a difficult order from Gus, or he's going to have to make a difficult decision, but we'll see.
On the point of one of them maybe looking like he can't keep his mouth shut, I did notice that the truck that transports them from the warehouse to the laundry, on the back there is a New Mexico license plate, and it's totally visible to the Germans, which means when they're getting on the truck, they see that, they know, even if they can't be sure that this is all happening in New Mexico, they at least know the truck, they know its license plate number.
Oh, that's true. And when Mike asks Werner about sending Kai home, when Werner reassures Mike that Kai is a good boy, he says, he does, and then he uses his hand to make the talking symbol, blah, 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 blah. So that could be a hint that Kai's going to talk.
That's a good point. I could see him getting worked up over something and then threatening, or explaining, like, look, this is how much I know. We want more money if we're going to be stuck here. Something like that. Also, remember what we learned from Werner about what airman trout means? World-class strength. And Mike did not care at all.
Not at all. That was right after Mike tried to speak German, I think, and Kai said in German, his German sounds stupid.
Yeah.
And Werner reassures Michael, oh, he said that you sound like a real kraut. How do you say bullshit? So that wraps up Mike, Gus, Hector for this episode. I think not a whole lot of them. From Gus's standpoint, we see a little bit more of evil Gus. Mike and the Germans, we start to see what's going wrong there, but this feels like a lot of pieces moving in place. Something interesting is coming in the next 2 or 3 episodes.
Switching gears, if we go back to the beginning and think about the opening montage for this episode, we had great use of split screen as a tool for showing how Jim and Kim are just drifting apart over these months that it's flashing forward. And it's neat to see how they play with all of these old activities that they used to always do together that we've seen them do in previous episodes, like brushing their teeth, waking up in bed, or going to bed together. And so we see how this changes over time. And first they're brushing their teeth together, but as the scenes progress, they're doing it at different times. We also see them going to bed at different times. At one point we see Kim spooning Jimmy, and I say that with quotes around it because she just basically takes one foot and puts it on him, which, again, there's just no intimacy there anymore. We also see, as this montage progresses, Kim is doing great at her job. She's collecting all of these like little trophies from Mesa Verde with the guy on the horse, each with a new location in the country that they've established themselves in. Whereas we see Jimmy selling more and more phones. We see him hanging out with Huel. They're eating some burritos in a van, and chilling in the back of a van while it's raining, which I just thought sounded like a great time.
Yeah, Jimmy seems to be having a great time. It's all sort of melancholy when he's with Kim, but when he's on his own selling phones, he seems like he's in his element.
We also see Kim get her cast cut off, finally. So by the end of the montage, she looks completely recovered from her car accident. We also see her working in this fancy, nice office, but she's also squeezing a stress ball under the table at what looks like a Mesa Verde meeting. We also see her helping out criminals as a public defender, doing all that pro bono work. Meanwhile, again, we keep seeing Jimmy selling these phones, and we can see that time is flying because he keeps meeting with the PPD officer. We keep seeing the documentation for that progressing month by month until it's 2004. So we know it's getting close to the point where Jimmy can get back into law. We also see that he's using these business cards that say Saul Goodman on them for his phone dealing business.
Need to call? Buy from Saul. So this is the proto version of Better Call Saul.
This opening scene, there's so much happened, and they do a really good job covering the progression of those many months through this montage, and again, using split screen in a great way. Not only do they use that black bar in the middle as the symbolism for their separation, but also they do a great job making each side of the screen a different color, and they use a lot of different... They alternate a lot between having one side looking very blue and one side looking very orange, which is kind of a classic color combination that you see in cinema. And it made for just a visually interesting experience. And I found my eyes darting back and forth the whole time, trying to make sure I wasn't missing anything. And they did it. They really made you feel like you were there all along the way as the time was passing.
How much time passed?
I feel like it's about 6 months.
I think it was 6 to 8 months. We also, later in the episode, it's mentioned that there's one more month until Jimmy's able to practice the law. So, I think it was around that amount of time.
Okay, because, we learned in a recent, it might have been last episode, that it will be 10 months until he can practice law again. And so if he's coming close to that, then I think 6 to 8 months, maybe closer to 8 months, sounds reasonable. And so the opening montage ends with they're both getting back into bed. The split screen is still there. They're facing totally opposite directions. Kim's side fades to black, and yet Jimmy's side is still there, and he's just wide awake, kind of crunched up on his side. And it's heartbreaking.
Very heartbreaking. A couple of interesting things about this montage. You and I both thought that Kim's plan to have her cake and eat it too wasn't going to work out. But it actually seems like her plan to take that leadership role at Schweikart while taking on these pro bono cases, the plan seems to be working. On the other side, Jimmy selling phones, that seems to be going fine, too. It sort of feels like everything is going okay, except for the relationship between Jimmy and Kim.
Right. Things are going well for them individually at the cost of what they used to share in common.
Kim is pursuing her dream of helping people, while Jimmy is succumbing to his criminal ways. So the passage of time here basically allows them to both go on the paths that we saw them start down in the last couple of episodes. You see it taking its toll on their relationship. You and I both said that part of why the relationship is working is because they're comfortable. But at some point, something will happen that will take the distance forming between them and bring it to the surface. And I think we see that happen later in the episode.
We also had a listener, Dave, email into us about what many might have perceived to be a slip up on the part of the show, where when you look at one of those split screen scenes where you can see Jim and Kim brushing their teeth, it looks like her cast is on her right arm, which would be a mistake because it's actually on her left arm. And I was originally, when I read that email, I looked at the scene again, and Gil did too, and we were both thinking, wait, yeah, Dave is right. They made a mistake. But we thought about it some more and realized, if you just picture yourself standing where Kim must be standing and imagine looking in the mirror, then if your left arm is in the cast, it's going to be a mirror image of that when you look in the mirror. And so if you're watching it like us, we will think that we're looking at someone whose right arm is in a cast, but really it's just her reflection in the left arm. And maybe I don't need to clarify this for everyone, but it fooled me for a sec.
Yeah, if you think that we're talking down to you by explaining how reflections work, I had to rewatch that scene about 12 times, and I literally stood in front of a mirror and lifted my left arm and confirmed, yes, it appears that my reflection is lifting his right arm. So Dave and anyone else that might have been thrown off by this, we did not catch the writers making a mistake. They are just accurately depicting how reflections work.
Next, Jimmy is in the process of leasing some real estate, and he's talking sort of directly into the camera. You almost feel like you're watching like HGTV or more like MTV Cribs or something like that.
Or it's like Jimmy talking directly to you. We got to see what it feels like because he's speaking right into the camera, which was awesome.
You feel like he's giving you a little tour of his sad, pathetic, and disgusting home. It wasn't that bad.
You and I both cycled through a few guesses on who we thought he was speaking to. I think my first thought was Mike. Was there anybody else that you were thinking he might have been talking to?
I really had no idea. If I had to guess, it would have been Kim, but I didn't actually think it was very likely. I was surprised to find out that it was Huel. Especially Jimmy seems so embarrassed, to show him the bathroom, which apparently smells horrible, and he's clearly compensating as he's talking about this place for some of its flaws, which again I find funny because he's talking to Huel as though he has to impress him.
The idea of Jimmy trying to impress Huel, or looking at Huel as though this is a cool guy. I don't want Huel to think I'm a loser.
I mean, I wouldn't either.
No, definitely not. Huel seems like such a cool guy. He's like calm, collected, which makes sense for this scene because Jimmy's talking to the camera for so long, totally uninterrupted. So I figured whoever he's talking to has to be a real calm, cool, collected person to allow him to talk for so long without interrupting.
Yeah.
Made sense it was Huel. Had to be Huel.
Yeah, and Huel's response is just, so no more cell phones?
And when Jimmy asks him, well, so Huel, if you were a lawyer, is this the kind of place you'd have? If I was a lawyer? No.
Big glass high rise when I'm not on my boat.
So Jimmy was unsuccessful in talking the place up to Huel.
And does this building look like Saul Goodman's future office? Do you think this is what we end up seeing? It just hasn't been renovated?
I thought about that. It doesn't look the same at all. I mean, it's not impossible that you're able to turn this into what we eventually see in Breaking Bad. And I might have to go back and rewatch to sort of confirm, but at least at first glance, the locations look pretty different. So I don't know if this is where he's ultimately going to put his stake in the ground, or even if he does, we're still a few years out from Breaking Bad. So it's possible he starts here, and then as he makes more money, he moves up to somewhere else.
I can't wait for this. They're inevitably going to have a montage where this place gets fixed up into a law office. I can't wait to watch that.
Oh, I hope we get to see that this season, even if it's just in the last episode. And maybe that could be how the season ends. He opens up his new law office. He's going by the name Saul Goodman. I think it's feasible that he could be an early version of Saul Goodman where he's actually calling himself that, which he's done, but not yet in the context of law. I think it's feasible that the season could end with him calling himself Saul Goodman as a lawyer.
Complete with one of those Saul Goodman suits with one of those bright button downs that he always wears.
We've already seen him in the tracksuit, so we know he has in his mind that the concept of having the right outfit for the job. So if he's going by Saul Goodman, he's going to try and pick out what is he going to wear to fit that character.
Later, Jimmy and Kim are on the way to her company dinner party. It looks some kind of cocktail party. And Jim looks sort of like a fish out of water there, while Kim seems to fit in, but also she seems kind of like she's faking it a little bit.
I was very interested to see how Jimmy was going to act in the party scene, because he really knows how to interact with people. But usually when we see him being smooth and witty, it's in the context of trying to sell something. So I was really curious to see, in the context of just trying to socialize, can he turn on the charm? And at first, I thought he was doing a good job of it. In fact, I'm going to a wedding this weekend, and I thought, you know what? I'm going to try and put my Jimmy hat on this weekend. I wanted to steal his move where somebody comes over with hors d'oeuvres, and he grabs the whole plate, and he says, oh, we're going to need those over here. I was like, this guy is so smooth. And then about 60 seconds later, I thought, you know what? I'm just going to try and be myself this weekend.
Yeah. And the people at the party were not too happy with him, but we'll get to that. First, we see him checking out Kim's office, and he's counting out the steps to see how big it is. And her office is 10 steps long compared to his, which is only 6. So he's walking in there with an inferiority complex. And then while he's in there, he's looking at her stuff, and he sees a thank you letter of one of her public defense clients.
So it's very clear when he's in the office that he has the inferiority complex, like you said. I think there's no question there. When he sees the picture that's been drawn for Kim, do you think he has a similar reaction? He was jealous of her status. Do you think there's any jealousy of her from a moral standpoint, that she's doing this good thing, she's being recognized for it? Or do you think he just saw it just moved on, it doesn't really hit him in any way?
I think it hit him, but not in a way that suggests it's something he wants to do or that he wants that kind of moral meaning. I think he sees it and is maybe just surprised about what she's been up to when, look, she has this big office and she has this fancy job, and yet she's also doing this stuff. It probably just seemed kind of odd to him.
He's surprised that, in the same way you and I were surprised to see that her plan is actually working, that she's been able to achieve this status, has a higher leadership position, but is still doing the type of work that gets you thank you letters. Then
Jimmy has a couple of drinks, and that's when things take a turn for the worse at this party. He gets into a conversation with Schweikart and Kim. They're talking about their company retreat, and they're thinking about going on a ski trip. And Jimmy starts suggesting he starts coming up with some what just seemed to be good-humored suggestions that he's not totally serious about, but he suggests they rent a party bus and go to this some ski slopes called Telluride, and some custom matching parkas for the whole team. And Schweikart makes a deliberate point of telling Jimmy that he's not invited.
And Jimmy keeps one-upping it and saying, you know what? Go even bigger. You could go up to, some faraway place, Aspen, and you can see Schweikart's getting annoyed. He's, Jimmy, that's a 9-hour drive. That's unreasonable.
I don't think Jimmy was that out of line in this scene. I mean, he's at a party. They're just messing around. Everyone's been drinking a little bit. But Schweikart is both annoyed at Jimmy, but also he's not putting a stop to the conversation. He keeps still entertaining Jimmy's ideas and either basically explaining why they're impractical, but he's not being a good sport at all. But he's still leaving an opening for Jimmy to continue making a scene and drawing more and more attention.
And so you read the scene as Schweikart sort of bullying Jimmy, and although Jimmy is acting obnoxious and does create a scene, getting the attention of everyone in the room, do you see it as Schweikart sort of antagonizing Jimmy?
I wouldn't go that far. I think Jimmy was a little out of line. He was getting carried away, but Schweikart drew more attention to it by his, he kept responding to Jimmy's suggestions in somewhat of a forceful way, or some kind of sarcastic way, but basically in a way where it was clear he's not playing along. And that alone will draw more attention. And so in the end, Jimmy ended up looking worse than he had to. And I think Schweikart didn't do him any favors. And if what Schweikart wanted was for there to not be a scene, he wasn't acting that way.
And we did have a listener, Reginald, actually write in, and he read the scene similarly to how you read it. The subject line was, Jimmy's not the bad guy this time. And essentially, Reginald wrote that Schweikart drew first blood. He, in not exactly these words, said to Jimmy, "You're not one of us." So although Jimmy did create a scene, it was in response to being antagonized by Schweikart. I went back and rewatched the scene, and it's a little bit of a gray area because Jimmy walks over while Schweikart is talking about going on this trip, and Jimmy says something along the lines of, "So where are we going?" And then Schweikart jokingly says, "Employees only." And you can see that gets under Jimmy's skin. And as Schweikart starts to talk about where they're going to go, I forget the exact location, but Jimmy says, "Well, I guess that would be okay." So he's implying that Schweikart doesn't have the best plan here. So he takes the bait and says, "All right, Jimmy, what do you think we should do?" So it's not totally clear who started it.
He has a right to be kind of annoyed here.
I wouldn't say that either of them were being a bully. I think neither of them really liked each other from the start. Who actually started it? Unclear. At the end of the day, though, Jimmy's the one who turned it into a big scene. He probably had a bit more to drink than Schweikart. So if I had to point my finger at anybody, I'd probably point it at Jimmy, but I also don't entirely blame him.
So we do see that Jimmy has a couple of drinks, and that I'm sure that contributed to him getting kind of carried away here. We also know that Gene, as a character, seems to drink pretty frequently, like on his own at night. Do you think that we're going to see any theme at all related to alcohol, or is this going to just remain a peripheral thing that they work into the character just to show what kind of mood he's in at the time?
If I didn't know where Saul ends up in Breaking Bad, I would say yes, I could see it turning into a theme. But if he does struggle with alcoholism as Jimmy, then we know he gets over it because he was so functional when we saw him in Breaking Bad. Maybe we'll see him indulge as things are going poorly with Kim. If I had to put my money on something, though, I'd say I don't think it's going to become a major theme until we see more of him as Gene. The other reason why I don't expect it to become a major theme is because we're seeing him drink when he's in a context that we haven't really seen him in before. He's in an awkward social situation, so drinking in that context, I could see it as a one-off. We'll keep our eye on it. Make sure that Jimmy doesn't get out of line there.
So we see Jimmy selling phones out of the van, and this new customer shows up. Jimmy walks over with some swagger in his tracksuit and some hip-hop music blaring. He adjusts his hair some more in the reflection, and then he is approached by someone who Jimmy immediately points out is a police officer, despite the fact that he's in plain clothes. And it turns out that the officer found one of Jimmy's prepaid phones on a drug dealer that the guy arrested. And he basically is trying to strong-arm Jimmy into closing up shop and going somewhere else. And he basically threatens him, and, Jimmy gets pretty pissed off and makes the officer out to be the bad guy who's getting in Jimmy's way. Jimmy has a license to work here. Everything he's doing on his end is legitimate, and what his customers do with the phones is none of his business. And this cop is challenging Jimmy on his conscience, and he says, as long as you make a quick buck, the whole world can go in the crapper. And he's really getting in Jimmy's face. And then this is when the scene takes a turn for the worse and also for the hilarious. So we see Huel walking down the street. He's got his headphones on. He's listening to music. And he's got a bag in his hand. And being loyal to Jimmy, he sees this guy from behind getting up in his face, and so Huel smacks him with the bags and basically knocks him out.
With what we later learned was a bag of sandwiches.
Exactly. And so it's amazing the impact that it seemed to have on this guy.
My favorite part of this scene has to be Jimmy's reaction right after Huel knocks the guy out and takes his headphones off. Jimmy doesn't panic. He just points at the guy and says, "He's a cop." He tried to stop Huel when he was walking over. He kept waving his hands. No, he's a cop. And Huel couldn't hear him because he had that music playing.
And my friend Dan, who is an avid listener of Saulcast and an avid Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad fan, says that this song that Huel is listening to is called Big Mamoo. And Dan tells me it's about not letting a woman rule your life. And at first, I didn't see the relevance to Huel because, as far as I know, we don't know very much about Huel's love life, although I'd be curious to learn more. But Mamoo is a town in Louisiana, and the singer of the song is basically singing about how he wants to go back there, to escape because he's sick of being told what to do. In this case, it is kind of relevant when we think about what happens to Huel this episode.
Where he wants to avoid going to prison for smacking this cop with sandwiches.
Do you think there's a specific law about that?
Probably. This is like a code. We have a code 312.
That's officer struck by sandwich. Well, in medicine, we have what's called the ICD-10 codes, which are a way of standardizing all the different diagnoses that you can make for a patient, and that's kind of how you decide what you can charge them. And they get extremely specific because any complaint that's ever any diagnosis that's ever been made has been converted into a code. And so there's some that are like patient struck by turtle, and very, very, very specific ones like that.
There's a code for someone being struck by a turtle?
Yeah.
Is there a code for being struck by a frozen waffle?
If it's happened and it's been documented in a medical setting, there probably is a code for it.
Huh. It happened to me. That's why I asked when I was younger.
What happened?
Somebody got mad at me and smacked me with a bag of frozen Eggo waffles. It was undocumented, though.
Yeah, you took it in stride. You didn't press charges.
I took my revenge. Yeah, one word for you. Bisquick.
Okay, so Jimmy tries to explain that this whole thing was a mistake, but the officer points out that this guy has a prior arrest for pickpocketing. In fact, he's the one who arrested Huel. And so the officer thinks that this was some form of vengeance, even though Jimmy makes a very good point, which is that Huel only saw him from behind, that he was wearing these headphones, he couldn't hear, he had no idea what was going on, that the police officer was in plain clothes and in an unmarked car. So he makes a very good point. The officer doesn't care, and he arrests Huel anyway.
It was heartwarming to see how far Jimmy was going out of his way to try and help Huel. He even told the cop, "All right, I'm going to stop selling here. I'm going to, you'll never see me here again." But no matter what he promises, the cop says, "Look, I tried to be nice to you earlier, and you didn't listen." So yeah,
right.
No dice.
Which is a crock of bull because the officer was never really being very nice.
Yeah, he was telling Jimmy, "Why don't you try parking in front of a grocery store and sell to legitimate people that will need these phones?"
You can see where the cop is coming from because his job is to stop all these people who he considers to be the bad guys, and here's Jimmy, who's helping them escape. So Huel is threatened with 2.5 years in jail for this. Why do you think Jimmy cares so much about helping him? Is it just they have a bond, they're friends? Any other reason?
I think it's a little bit that they have a bond. I also think that even if it's not conscious, where Jimmy thinks, I need to help Huel now, so he'll help me in the future. I think it's sort of baked into Jimmy's system of existence that he'll go out of his way to help people, do things for people, because down the road, when he's going to need favors and he needs help, it'll make it more likely that people will do that for him. And I'll just repeat it one more time. I don't think he's doing the mental calculation, I need to help Huel now, so he'll help me later. I think it's more just force of habit. I'm going to help people when it makes sense, and as a whole, that will make my life better. And he needs to call in favors all the time. It's a huge part of how he functions.
Right. He operates in this reciprocal way where he'll help people out that matter to him. And that's been reinforced because usually there's a way they can end up helping him in the future. And I think that is part of what's going on here. I also think, Jimmy is not without a conscience. His conscience is just kind of differently wired than a lot of people's. But in this case, Huel did what he did out of loyalty to Jimmy, and it'd be a major bro code violation for him to just kind of, let him get arrested without a fight.
We've seen this side of Jimmy before, back in season 1, episode 2, when he negotiated with Chuko to save the skateboard kids from getting their arms or legs or tongue cut off. It seems like he often finds himself in the position of bargaining for somebody else's life or well-being, which I guess is what being a lawyer comes down to oftentimes.
Right. And in this case also, to defend Huel, he doesn't even need to stick his neck out. It takes effort, but he's not putting himself in any risk. So Huel plans to flee and avoid jail, basically to start a new life, which Jimmy thinks is ridiculous and says they're going to catch up to him eventually. Saul wants a shot, or Jimmy or Saul, it's hard to say at this point, wants a shot at defending Huel. He thinks he can keep him out of jail. And Huel says, "You're not even a lawyer." And Jimmy says, "I don't need to be a lawyer. I'm a magic man." Which that kind of sounded like something Saul Goodman would say.
Yeah, I think he gets his law license back in a month. And like I said before, I think he is, for all intents and purposes, I think he is Saul. He's literally calling himself Saul, and he's going to be practicing law in a month. So I think he's just about there.
And it was at this point that I started to think Kim would get involved, because here we have Saul, who doesn't have a license to practice law right now, and we have a low-level criminal, which is the kind of person that Kim has been helping lately. Or people who are being treated unfairly by the system, which, even though what Huel did, may have broken the law, maybe it didn't, because this definitely was a complicated situation, and I think most people would agree that you cannot charge Huel fairly with assaulting a police officer in this case. And so it really is right up Kim's alley here.
Yeah, as much as Jimmy or Saul is in the business of spinning things a certain way to get criminals off, in this case, I'm totally on Huel's side. He's a bodyguard. He sees a guy come out of an unmarked vehicle, dressed in normal clothing, getting in Jimmy's face, yelling at him. So he took non-lethal force to call it assault against an officer and threaten him with, 2+ years of jail time is overreaching.
Totally. And Kim sees it that way too. But she doesn't like Jimmy's plan for trying to get Huel out of this. And so what Jimmy did was he looked into the officer's history and found out that he had a DUI many years ago, and that he did face some kind of disciplinary action from the police for this. So what he wanted to do was get the officer smelling like liquor right before the court, and to maybe get him flustered, or basically make him either be drunk or appear drunk when he's in court, and then also play up the officer's documented anger issues and basically make him look like he isn't credible. Kim doesn't like that idea.
How was Jimmy going to get him drunk? I would love to have seen that plan get executed because I kept scratching my head thinking, how is he going to get him to smell like liquor?
Yeah, I'm sure he could do it. He could hire someone to spill it on him, or he could actually, maybe he actually could succeed in getting him to go to a bar and get drunk with someone. He could even hire like a woman or something to do it.
And Mike could do it.
Mike could totally do it. Well, you know, he could trade old war stories from the police.
Let me buy you a drink.
Wouldn't you love to hear Mike say that to you?
Yeah, even as I said it right now, it like felt good to hear it. I'd love to sit down and just have a beer with Mike. I don't even like beer, but I'd like to have a beer with Mike.
When Jimmy explains his plan, or he explains the whole predicament to Kim, including his plan to get Huel out of it, before Kim even has a chance to react, he gets all of that out. Kim's first reaction is, wait, you've been selling burners on the street? And she's got no words for this. Like, once Jimmy explains what his plan is to take down this officer, and she's like completely flabbergasted by everything he just told her.
He steamrolls right past that point and even says, Kim, can we focus on the matter at hand?
Yeah, he doesn't want to address the fact that he's been selling burner phones as his main source of income on the side without her knowing for like over half a year. You can tell just by the look on her face at this point, this is a lot. The romance is completely dead and it's beyond any hope of revival.
Thanks, Kim. Listen, I really appreciate it.
Okay.
And tell me if there's anything I can do.
Yep. Oh, excuse me, Jimmy. Oh, Beulah, can you just... Oh, thank you.
It's over for them. It's done. She agrees to go along with it, but when he thanks her, she says, okay. And then he leaves the room, looks at her sad, and basically has the door shut in his face.
Yeah.
So you and I both agreed on the instant take that she's going to help him out with this and then potentially walk away.
Yeah, they're done after this. This is basically the last hurrah. But I think she'll do it. I think she'll succeed. I don't think he will have to go to jail. And if he does, it'll be just for a short period of time. That said, it looks like Jimmy has his own plan on the side that he still plans to execute. So we don't know if it's still the liquor plan where he's going to make the cop look like non-credible, but I guess we'll find out. So we see Kim chatting with the prosecutor about the case that's coming up. And she walks in there like she owns the place, and she thinks that it seems like she is very confident that her argument here is going to work, but the prosecutor is very firm with her in a way that we haven't seen. And this really stands in contrast with her previous negotiation with the other prosecutor, the guy who basically reduces someone's sentence to like 4 months probation, and that's it, before the case even starts.
Yeah, it's too bad that guy isn't the prosecutor here. Instead, there's a woman that I don't think we've seen before who seems to have a lot more of a spine than that guy.
Right. Yeah, she's very tough. And Kim tries saying, this is unequal justice. And she explains all these prior cases that have occurred with all these prior cases that this woman prosecuted for much less time. And cases which were more severe, where one person broke an officer's nose and all these things, and the prosecutor she doesn't care. She says that those people didn't have a prior record, whereas Huel does for pickpocketing. And Kim asserts, look, he hit him with a bag of sandwiches and he didn't even get hurt. And then this is the part that I think really stung and probably hit Kim pretty hard, which was the subject turned to Jimmy. And the prosecutor says that he's a scumbag, disbarred lawyer who peddles drop phones to criminals. Oof.
And the prosecutor says, why are you taking this case? This is not like you. Part of me suspected that the prosecutor would pick up on the fact that Kim is with Jimmy and she's doing this for the wrong reasons.
I suppose, which is from the prosecutor's standpoint, that would be a reasonable interpretation, but we know that Huell is innocent here. And I think Kim believes that too. And so that's, even without Jimmy, this is the kind of case that I think she might take. It doesn't have as much of the heartache aspect that some of the other cases we've seen her take have. Like, with one of them was this younger kid who, it was his first offense, it seemed. Whereas Huell, he's less sympathetic, but in this case, like, it's really clear he shouldn't be punished.
And you can see Kim, as she's arguing with the prosecutor and is sort of losing, she gets frustrated and she gets a little bit emotional. And to me, it felt like, even though it's not exactly the type of case that she would take, it's almost like she sort of talked herself into believing that it was and treating it as though it was. As she started to lose, I think, I wonder if part of her is getting more serious about it because she just doesn't want to lose. I don't know how invested she actually is in proving Huell's innocence.
Right. I don't think she has a great deal of empathy for Huell, because even if she thinks he's innocent here, she does know that he has a criminal past and is not perfectly innocent. I think that she is upset during this conversation, not because it means an innocent person will go to jail, but because she's not used to losing.
Exactly. Which I don't know if that's a side we've seen of Kim, at least not for a while.
Not for a while, because she seemed like she was going down this high and mighty path that is supposed to be more noble or honorable. But we see some pride here, and it gets a little damaged in this case. We also see that she has a new idea about what to do here, and it seems like she's going to do something that's a little off the beaten path, kind of Jimmy style. We don't know if it's going to be something illegitimate or illegal, but it's interesting that she starts thinking this way only when this interaction with the prosecutor happens. I think once she sees that she can't argue this case just on the merits that she's already addressed, she starts thinking outside of the box, or maybe she's willing to bend the rules or play out of the system.
We see her at a store basically buying a bunch of markers, crayons, papers, and then she calls Jimmy and says, "Whatever you're planning to do, don't do it. I've got my own way." We sort of glossed over it earlier, but when Kim tells Jimmy, "Don't do anything illegitimate to get Huell out of this, okay? I'm taking the case." And Jimmy says, Sure. And she's like, "You're not going to do anything." He goes, "You'll do your thing and I'll do mine." So she knows that he's planning to attempt something. So she calls him and says, "Don't do it. I have a way."
What do you think she's doing?
Honestly, I have absolutely no idea. The only potential guess is one that a listener wrote in with. And I'm not saying I think this is right, but I can't think of anything better. But Tom wrote in and says he thinks maybe Huell has a side gig as a security guard in a public school, and Kim is going to try and get a letter writing campaign for children to write in to create PR and get the DA to go easy on him. I don't know if that's what's going to happen. I don't think that's what's going to happen. But the concept of letters being written sounds plausible to me, because we did see Jimmy notice the letter on Kim's desk earlier in the episode. And what else would you do with a bunch of markers and papers than write something colorful on those papers?
Yeah, I'm sort of thinking something similar, and I don't know how. I don't think we can get as specific as saying he's works in a public school or anything like that, but I agree that there might be some letter writing involved. It looked like she was getting stationery or notepads and all these colorful markers. I think it might somehow involve something with creating the impression that kids like him. I don't know.
I would love to see a scene of Huel having to interact with children. Kim telling him, okay, you need to make an appearance at a kid's birthday party and entertain the children for about an hour.
And I'm reading some theories people are suggesting, which is maybe she is going to get people to protest against the DA, arguing that Huel's case here and the charges he's getting are unfair. And this would put all this external pressure on them to go easy on him. And so all these supplies she's getting is just to facilitate the creation of this protest.
I could see her reaching out to some of the people she's helped recently to ask for the favor of, you'd think that they would sympathize with somebody being mistreated by the law. So, hey, can you guys come and help me protest this case?
It sounds a little too like what might be considered unethical in her line of work, but who knows? It still matters to her a lot that she wins cases, and this might cause her to do something she might later regret.
I think that probably none of the theories we put forward are precisely correct, but I do think that it's going to be some version of what we're describing here. I think we're getting close. And to what you said, we're seeing a little bit of a different side of Kim where she really doesn't want to lose. And I don't think she's going to cross the line and do any Jimmy level unethical activities, but something that's a little bit outside of her comfort zone. And it'll be interesting to see. You have to imagine she's going to blame Jimmy for that, and it could make things, how could you force me to do this? And you could see this drawing more of a divide between the two of them.
Kind of a downer of an episode.
Sort of a downer. A lot of humor from the Huel storyline, except for the fact that it's surrounded by the deteriorating relationship between Jimmy and Kim. Hey, you know what? There's some uplifting stuff in here. Hector, he's got the ability to communicate again.
Yeah, he can move his finger. I can't wait to hear that sweet, sweet sound of his bell.
Yeah. I'm Gil.
I'm Adam.
And this is Saulcast.
We're thrilled to see all of the listeners who've been emailing in to us with lots of interesting theories and some enlightening observations. And we would love to hear more. We think you all probably have lots of interesting things to share with us, theories, predictions, questions, and we'd love to feature them on the show. So please email us at saulcastbros@gmail.com. That's saulcast, BROS, @gmail.com. You can really tell us anything.
Another thing you can do that really helps us out is if you've got a couple minutes free, if you can go into the Apple Podcast app and leave us a review, leave us a rating, helps us get more listeners. And I've said it before, I'll say it again, it really makes our day. We are getting close to the end of the season here, so looking back at the last 7 episodes of the show, Adam and I really appreciate the listenership that's grown. We really enjoy recording this, and it especially helps when we get some feedback and interaction from you. Let me just try this thing. Let me try this. Hold on. The soda water fountain, where the lemonade springs and the bluebird sings in the big rock candy mountain. Just want to have it, just in case.